Hi there, welcome to the Music Travel Guy YouTube channel. My name is Michael Piardi, I'm your host. And in today's video, we are diving deep into what it takes to craft a unique sound as an independent artist and build an authentic social media presence in today's music world. Joining me for this conversation, he's British musician and composer James Berkeley. James is a powerhouse in the UK soul, jazz and R&B scenes. James has worked with the legendary group Incognito and collaborated with R&B sensation Mariba, ranking up over 1 million streams. Beyond his incredible way of inspiring different genres, I love his music. James is really passionate about sharing his journey and also helping fellow artists and musicians find their voice. I've been following James for a while on Instagram, and I love the way he shows up online, conveying strong messages, talking all things music, and being on social media as well, so being online. And that's exactly why I brought him on for this podcast interview. We get into his creative process, deep connection to Black music, and how he shaped such a signature sound. Plus, we break down what it really takes today to be authentic on social media. So make sure to listen to the conversation all the way through. Now, without further ado, let's jump right in.
So I feel like I'm quite lucky in terms of my journey, in the sense that I kind of always knew that music was the thing that I wanted to do with my life, really. I gravitated towards the piano when I was like kind of like 4 or 5 sort of thing. We just had like one of those little keyboards around the house that has all like the DJ sounds and like the gunshots and everything, and I just kind of gravitated towards that and just mess around on it. The first time I actually played in front of people, I think I was either 5 or 6. It was like a village hall, and I played "My Heart Will Go On," the song from Titanic. Probably didn't play it very well, but so like both my parents are really, really into music, so yeah, definitely grew up with a lot of music in the house. Like they've got a big vinyl collection, so yeah, they're into, my dad especially is really into a lot of prog. And also into, stuff like Stevie Wonder and like Steely Dan. I kind of like had some of those records in the house growing up. And yeah. You know what is really interesting in terms of my musical journey, in terms of the music that I made and make, I've gone down a whole kind of like just very varied avenue. And in terms of the music that I make now, that was definitely not what I was making genre wise when I was, even like a teenager and even kind of like early 20s. So when I started writing music, that was around the age of kind of like 13, 14. So like I said a minute ago, piano was the thing that I initially gravitated towards. And I played that up until the age of about 12. I did grades, and like a lot of kids at that age, it kind of like sucked a lot of the fun out of it for me. And there's this disconnect between the music that I was listening to and the music that I was playing. I was playing all these like classical pieces. I wasn't listening to classical music. So, obviously when you're playing the music that you like, you get so much more out of it. And that's just kind of like the path that a lot of kids take when it comes to like learning music. And so after the age of 12, I kind of like just lost my love for playing piano. And yeah, I picked up the guitar. I never really kind of like tried to learn the guitar. I just kind of played, just like had a couple chord shapes, and I just like made really, really questionable acoustic singer-songwriter music, which almost felt like is a rite of passage when it comes to like being a songwriter. So yeah, I did that when I was like 13, 14. And the first kind of bands that I was in, I was just singing, and I was in a pop punk band, and then I was in like a post-hardcore metalcore band, and I like did some screaming as well as singing with like a horrendous technique. And and then I kind of got into music production and electronic music, and that kind of steered me. That was probably the starting point of my journey that kind of took me to where I am. So I came back to piano about mid like yeah, mid 20s about, and it was stuff like early James Blake, and how I just really loved the chords, the progressions. They felt really like jazzy and interesting to me. So initially, I came back to piano as a way of just like writing better chords when I came to like producing. And as I kind of went on that journey and went a bit deeper, I realized that the way that I was really going to get the most out of it was like proper deep diving on jazz. So
Jazz.
I did it as basically a means to an end. Initially, I did it because I wanted to learn better chords, but I wanted to like have this solid foundation. And then through doing it, I kind of like got much more into that than I thought, and then kind of took me down the path that I'm up to where I am now.
Of
But it
course.
but it all started from just like wanting to play better chords, basically. And yeah, I started playing like a lot of straight ahead jazz just to try and like get the language down. I'd go to these like jazz jam nights. There was this one year, I might have been like 2015. It's probably the year that I made the most progress. I went to this one jazz jam in Brighton where I live every single week for like a whole year basically. And every week I'd get up and I'd like absolutely eat shit. I'd just play. I'd like just be so bad, and it would be so embarrassing. And I'd finish it, and I'd be like, oh god, like I can't feel that embarrassed next week. I have to like be better, and it just kind of put me. I set the parameter that I was going to go every week. So once that was
Yeah.
set, the only way to get around it was just to get better really fast.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, yeah, it was like reasonably stressful, just like coming every week and just like having to play a new tune and just like try and get my head around it. But it was like such a good way of getting better, just because I had this very regular, real feedback of whether the information I was taking in was like making any difference. Um, and yeah, I'd say that after deep diving on straight ahead jazz, I sort of came to this point where I still enjoy playing it, but there was again, similarly to what I was saying with playing grades when I was a kid, there was this disconnect between the music I was playing and the music I was listening to. Like there's always a place like in my heart for like straight ahead jazz, but I wasn't making that music. And even
Yeah.
though having that bebop language can be kind of cool when it comes to like soloing in a modern way, it wasn't it wasn't taking me down the right route. So then in the last few years, I haven't really practiced much at all, and most of the way that I get better is just through making music and just like following what I'm interested by. But what was really good with going on this long detour kind of deep diving was just like giving me this foundation. So I feel like even though I have not intentionally practiced for a couple years, I don't feel like I've gotten worse because I'm making music so much and I'm like sitting down and I'm like just creating. That
Of
in
course.
itself can be practiced. Like I always use the example of like music production. No one sits down and practices music production. You just make music and you get better through doing it. So I think practice, not to say that intentional practice isn't helpful, I think it's incredibly helpful, but I think it doesn't have to be viewed as this separate thing to the actual act of creation. Like they can kind of like be like worked in tandem. Like you can be doing one as well as the other at the same time.
Yeah.
um but yeah, man, that's kind of like that's my like overview of a journey from like a young age.
Yeah, that's a beautiful journey. No, I was very interested to hear from you the fact that you started from a completely different world, musically speaking. So because you
Mm.
mentioned prog rock, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting. And now, of course, there's jazz music, but it sounds like you're finding your own way to add James jazz version
Hmm.
into your own identity, into your own being. And how so now I'm thinking about your journey starting from the beginning. How do you interact today with the jazz and other genres in terms of creating your sound, your music? Because I think, I mean, from a music listening perspective,
Mm.
there's has to be a definition, so something that people can immediately hear that that is James
Yes,
music.
totally.
How do you see that? How uh,
Hmm.
what is it? What's important for you when it comes to defining that unique sound that represents yourself?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a really good question, man. And it's one that's like so hard to do. You know what? To me, the answer to that is always a retrospective one. So, just to detour slightly quickly, whenever I've gone about writing an album, for the most part, like let me just use the final record that we made for Yakul. Um, when we started writing that record, so we went to the middle of the countryside to do the whole thing. We did like 3 separate writing retreats, middle of nowhere, kind of just like locked in writing. And at the start of that record, I had quite a specific style that I wanted it to go
Yeah.
in. And then the way that it actually turned out, there were definitely influences from where I initially had in mind, but it definitely didn't sound exactly how I expected it to. And it was such a cool process to be like, oh man, like we're not actually that in control of where this goes, you know. And I think honestly, the truer you are to the ideas that are coming out of you, the less in control of the direction you actually are. Like you can sit down at the start of the day and be like, I'm gonna write a ballad. That is the song that I'm gonna write right now. And if a ballad doesn't want to come out of you, you can probably force a ballad to come out of you. I doubt it'll be particularly good though, you know? You've got to be, it's like being in tune with what is naturally coming out of you. And I think that is why I say that stylistically, the thing that makes you sound unique inherently, I think, should be a retrospective vision rather than like, this is, I know what my sound is. Now I'm going to go and create it. It should be, I've made this thing. Okay, what is the thing that makes that unique? I
Mm.
think you can't do it until you've made it. And obviously, it's a thing that constantly progresses and evolves. So one thing, you know, as a producer, I like work with, and over the years, I've worked with a lot of like brand new artists, and I think they're always rightfully kind of hung up on being like, oh, I really just want to like find my sound, and I don't think that's something that you can't do that in a vacuum. That's something that
Mm.
you have to do by actively releasing music, making music, and just like exploring. It's not something that you can decide. It's something that you get to define once you've made it, which is quite cool. I like it being that way around. So I like to think of each release that you do as just being like this like footprint in the sand sort of thing. It's a representative. It's representative of where you were stylistically at that point, and it doesn't have to stay the same. It was just like, this is me. This is what I was. This is what was coming out of me in 2022 or whatever, and you know that's going to progress over time. And the more things you've released, and the over the longer the period of time is, the easier it is to look back and be like, okay, what is the thread that kind of follows through all of this? And you know, there's loads of examples of people that constantly reinvent themselves. Like, I don't know, Herbie Hancock is a really good example. For he went from like the 60s doing like his kind of more straight ahead jazz, then in the 70s he had like Headhunters, then in the 80s again it was like a completely different thing. And years ago I read his autobiography, and there was a bit where he was saying that like he was kind of posing the question like, was it hard to kind of keep reinventing myself, because you know your audience starts to build up a perception of what you sound like, and when you keep changing, are you
Mm.
not concerned that you're just going to like keep like alienating your audience? He was saying that like you're going to lose like certain people by doing that, but then you're always going to gain new people.
Mm.
And again, I think what it comes down to is like, are you being authentic to yourself? Somebody that just like stays stylistically in the same place in order to satisfy their audience isn't being true to themselves, even if they are cultivating like a really, really strong connection with that audience. Internally, there's a bit of a disconnect because they're the only word that comes to mind is pandering. I don't know if that's a bit mean, but like you're kind of pandering to your audience rather than creating what is like or honest and true. So to me, the thing that's going to kind of like bring longevity and satisfaction from being an artist is just like staying authentic and true to like what's naturally coming out, and that is what your unique style is. It's just being true and honest.
This is beautiful, James. You got me thinking a lot about some of the things you mentioned, and I think what you said is really important, especially because you emphasized the importance of taking action, the importance behind the creative uh, act of doing things. I mean, it may sound a cliche, but that's the reality, and I think it works for everything. And you also, I mean, in this uh, beautiful, I would say, constellation of things you mentioned, you also said something um, very interesting, which is the exploration side of finding your uniqueness. Um, how does it work for you, and how much is important for you the role of inspirations in terms of exploring that um, that uniqueness that everyone wants, at
Yeah,
the end of the day, which I mean, the same for me as a creative human being creating and sharing things online. So,
definitely, man. So I think that your tastes and the things that you gravitate towards are this unique signal of your like overriding creative direction. That's not to say that the music you make is going to necessarily sound exactly like the things that you're influenced by, but I think it's a really good signal. It's like this, having like this mood board of like, this is what I like, this feels representative of what I want to be as an artist.
yeah,
But I think that you can also stick too closely to that, and that's why I think exploration is so important, because like I've definitely what tends to happen for me, as I find myself transitioning into like a slightly new style, there's usually like a couple artists that kind of like spearhead that change in a way. Like I'll get really into a couple artists and I'll be like, oh wow, okay, I can feel like this like internal metamorphosis in terms of like where I want to be stylistically. But usually the first few attempts that I have after that are just like too pastiche. They sound too similar to the new thing that I found that I'm excited by.
yeah,
And I think it takes a bit of time to dial back the exciting new inspiration and find a more authentic representation of your interpretation of like the thing that you were like getting inspired by. So I've definitely found this with this new album that I've made. It came from a couple things. There was like, yeah, a few artists that I got really really into that just kind of opened my mind and my eyes to just like a new space that just it felt
yeah,
really exciting to me. And it was also finishing Yeah Cool, and I guess like a rebellion against the like with the music that we made, and not like just in terms of the fact that there were a lot of chord changes, quite a lot of time signature stuff. It was all like written on keys for like for the most part, and I guess just after doing that for so long, it felt quite exciting to me to do something totally different. So the whole of this album I wrote on guitar, and I haven't written even a single song on guitar since I was fucking like 14 doing the acoustic singer-songwriter stuff. So
amazing.
it took me in this completely different place naturally.
Mm.
And instead of kind of like having these like complicated songs with quite a lot of chords, I was just really enjoying playing 2 chords or 4 chords, just really simple songs, but just like really focusing in on just like making, just writing good songs basically. Um, and yeah, there was like, I found this really satisfying enjoyment in that because it was so different to what I was doing before. And yeah, it just, it felt right to follow this path and kind of explore this new territory. It'd be interesting. I mean, like, moving forwards, what I do after that, I'm not exactly sure yet. It might turn out that I kind of like go back the other way and kind of like write much more complex stuff. But that's the that's the thing that I love about it, that you don't get to decide what it is before you've done it. And yeah, you it's just like I said, it's a representation of where you were creatively at that
Yeah.
moment, and I really love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful, James. I mean, I can feel that it sounds like it's part of it, and it's a continuing journey, isn't it, James?
Yeah.
Because it's not easy, and it's like, um, it's part of the experience. It's like, okay, I want to be that. I want to create that. So
Mm.
I'm willing to create an experience which is going to be filled by, ups and downs and trials and errors and understanding where to go. Um, Speaking of inspirations, is there any particular influences that are shaping your sound right now? An
You,
album or an artist, or is there
yeah,
any particular that is catching you here and is really inspiring you?
100%. So yeah, my kind of like new palette of inspiration from last year that directed me towards where this album went. It was kind of a combination of 3 artists. There was McGee's album that came out at the start of 2024 that like I feel like every muso has just been like talking about that album. Um yeah, so that McGee album was huge. It was just like I hadn't heard anything like it. Um it actually took me a bit of time to get into it, which is always a good sign for me when I do finally get into it. So just again to detour briefly, the first album that really got me into like R&B soul, neo soul, um, was D'Angelo's Voodoo, which I feel like
The
such a
answer is
cliche answer. But the first few times I listened to that record, I did not get it. It didn't make sense to me. And I remember I was on a flight and I was listening to a Spanish joint and it just kind of like clicked. I don't know what clicked, something clicked, and I was like, oh shit. And then once I'd understood one song, the whole album made sense. And one of my very favorite artists in the world, Marquez, had posted on Instagram on his story about this McGee album, and he was like, "This is the best album of the year." I was like, "Oh man, like I need to listen to this album." And I listened to it, and I was like, "Yeah, it's cool. It's got a vibe," but like it just did not click. And I listened to it a couple more
mm,
times, and then I was I was going. It was like the evening on like a Friday night, and for some reason I was like in Big Tesco going like doing a food shop, and I had my earbuds in. And second song on the album, there's this like guitar riff that comes in like 10 seconds into the song, and whatever reason I was just like I was attuned correctly for this moment, and it happened, and I just kind of stopped. I was like, oh wow, okay, shit. And it kind of like kind of made like the hairs on my arm stand up, and like from that moment on, like I listened to the whole of that album in that moment in Tesco, and the whole thing made sense, and it just, this one thing just unlocked the whole album for me, and I was like, right, okay, I understand this now. And yeah,
crazy.
yeah, it's wild how that can happen. But sometimes not liking an album is a good sign. um
Very, very good point. Yeah, I mean, it's personal, but it was. I mean, it's crazy to hear from you that the second time you listen to it, you got a completely, you
yeah,
know, different experience.
honestly, man, yes, it's really interesting. It kind of makes you realize that you always listen to stuff through like a filter, like as in your own filter in your own brain. And for whatever reason, mine kind of like just got brought down after that, and it just, yeah, all aligned and made sense. So yeah, that McGee album was huge. That listening to that and getting into that also made me understand Dijon, who like McGee plays guitar for. So then I kind of like got really into Dijon, and then
Mm.
also Humble the Great, who he released like 2 albums in like last year. It's like super prolific. Um, but yeah, that felt like it had this really nice simplicity, but just incredible songwriting. And I think I needed to hear that then, just to remind myself that you don't have to like write really complex songs. So the deep dive that I took over the years of jazz subconsciously instilled in my mind that I had to write stuff that was like complex, and it had to like modulate, and kind of like it had to be like really interesting chords. And listening to this Humble record, I was like, oh man, like this is such good songwriting, and it's just like like harmonically, it's like pretty simple. Like there's not like crazy changes going on, and that just kind of like really opened my mind to like focusing a bit more on yeah, just like songwriting. So one of the reasons I gravitated back to the guitar was because on the piano, because I played for so long and I've like delved into theory so much, subconsciously I just like my hands go to places, and I've got this, yeah, subconscious desire to just make stuff more complicated just for the sake of it. You know, the
Mm.
whole like just because you can doesn't mean you should. And by playing guitar, I can play like, I know that's like some voicings, but if I don't really think about it, I don't know what chord I'm playing.
Yeah.
And that just made me follow my ear instead of following my like theoretical understanding. And that felt very liberating. You know, you can end up being kind of shackled to your understanding of something to a certain degree. When it comes to creativity, there are literally no rules, and you find yourself following rules without even realizing you're doing it, just because they've been so just like drilled into you from like practicing or whatever it might be. So yeah, those three artists collectively helped me transition into just like a new place stylistically, I think.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing, James. It's crazy to see, to capture a moment. I mean, in your case, of course, where music gave you the opportunity to find clarity in what you wanted to focus on.
Mm,
That's 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 fantastic, and also uh, understanding the direction in terms of where I want my focus to interact the most. So, is it guitar or maybe keys? And
mm,
great, thank you,
definitely,
James. No,
man.
it was really, 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 fantastic to hear that from you. The first time,
Mm,
hearing this kind of reflection about um, um, someone in interacting with music. I
definitely,
mean, of course,
man.
technically speaking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, James, you are a multifaceted artist. So you're a vocalist, songwriter, writer, um, of course, producer. Uh, but you also take pride in helping other people, in helping people, like you said, which is one of the things I appreciate from people like you. So there's you creating, but there's also another side of you helping people. Uh,
Mm,
and and that was my first touching point when it comes to knowing your art, to knowing your artistry. And then of course I started listening to your work. My first ever interaction to you was Just the Same. So from
cool.
the ELVD and Friends album, which was released in 2022, right? If
Yeah.
I remember well, yeah. And then I started listening to your band project, so You're Cool, and I don't remember the name of the album, which was released in 2021. Uh,
Rise Indigo.
yes, yes,
Mm.
and I loved it.
Oh, thank you,
So
man.
no, yeah, I mean, I'm honest, 100%, because I what I do. So, for example, as soon as I discover an artist on Spotify, I immediately scroll down until the end of the page because I want to learn. I want to, understand more about, what's behind it. And getting back to your presence, helping other artists and musicians through, of course, um, the things you've created, but also your online presence. I wanted to, so I'd like to dive a little bit more deeper about that, because since I started following you, one of the things that really captured my attention is your way of being online. So showing who you are and showing a authenticity, so showing your being. So you, of course, wins, but also challenges, which is not an easy thing to do. Have
Mm.
I daily have a lot of discussions and conversations with independent artists and musicians. There's a lot of restrictions behind being on social media.
Of
So
course.
how, so based on your experience, James, how do you see the correlation between being yourself and your presence on social media? Because I love what you're doing and I feel like that it's you. So you are you, that, but it's not an easy thing to, not
Mm.
of course to do, but to show to other
Yeah.
people. So what's your experience? Because you also had the chance to grow an audience on Instagram. I
Mm.
started following you when you um, had, I think, 4,000 followers. Of course, I don't
Mm.
want to talk about followers, but that's the
Oh,
numbers
of course, man. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have in mind. So, what's your experience on this, James?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a really, really hard one because the world that we live in is so defined by metrics. It's very hard not to get your self-worth tied up with how you're perceived in an online setting. And as we become more and more online centric, it becomes harder to feel like you're enough in the physical world if you're not also getting all of this validation online.
Yeah,
And we're in this position now where everybody's just like fighting for this like small amount of attention from everybody, and it can be very overwhelming, very, very draining. There's not really any moment where you feel like you can just like come off it or switch off. It's like just this all encompassing thing, and it's very easy to tie your your like self-worth up in it. And also just like you said, the separating of who you are offline with who you are online. And one thing that I've definitely tried to do is be as like real as I can online. And similarly, what we were saying before about like your style, your unique style with in terms of like the music you make, being authentic online isn't necessarily as easy as just being like, I'm just going to be myself. Like, again, I think it's almost a retrospective thing that you just have to explore and just like try stuff and feel what works for you, what feels what's draining to you compared with what's fueling. um and it's also, I think it's very much, committing to the things which feel fun and not getting bogged down in chasing what might have worked before or what's working for other people, because it won't, if it's not authentic to who you are, then you won't be able to keep it up. And to be honest, it probably won't work if it's not authentic to who you are, because I think for the most part people have quite a highly attuned like bullshit barometer for socials. So like if you're not being authentic, you're not being like honest, a lot of the time people can kind of like subconsciously tell. uh it's, I think the there's a lot of pressure for, if like being a musician right now, there's a lot of pressure to put every part of yourself online. And I think it's important to not feel like you have to do that completely. I think there's okay, it's definitely harder now than it would have been even like 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago, plus 10 years, a whole different story. It's a lot harder to be somebody like Frank Ocean or D'Angelo in terms of like the level of mystique that they have. Like you're not gonna find new artists so much that just like rock up, release an album, disappear for 5 years, come back, and people still care. The conversation moves on so quickly now that if you're not able to just like be consistent, you're making it so much harder for yourself, which I don't think is a positive thing for people's mental health. Um, Basically, I think it's about finding, you've got those, like, I can't think what the word is. You got like the two circles with the bit in the middle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, what I can't think what it's called. It's fine if one side of that, it's like what is going to kind of like what's going to give you the best chance at like getting to where you want to be, and the other side, it's like what brings you joy and makes you feel happy. It's just finding that little bit between the two where
Mm,
you can you can kind of like play. You don't basically you just don't want to play against the odds because it's already so hard, and it's all well and good kind of like having this mentality of like, I'm gonna do this exactly how I want. Like I will always respect that, but like if you're actively making your life harder, then you need to at least be aware of that. And if you don't want to have an online presence, I completely understand and respect that. It's not to say that you cannot do it without having an online presence. It's just you're making your life so much harder, and you just need to be aware of that and not be bitter if it doesn't work. And I think like bitterness is such a bad emotion to feel because it gets all tied up with self-worth, comparison with other people. And yeah, metrics are just this thing that, for better or for worse, are just like people are caring about so much when it comes to just like how valuable you are as a person and how valuable your information is. So yeah, separating all of those things is really, really hard. I think if you are somebody, this is I'm talking to myself very much so, as well as other people here with this. If you're tying your level of like self-worth and validation up in how well stuff performs, even if it performs well, it's not going to solve the issue. That's like an internal issue that can't come from external validation, and that's just like something that you need to work on with like meditation and journaling and maybe therapy as well. Like
of course, yeah.
that's like a really, really important thing. And up until a few months ago, I hadn't really had any like large amount of positive validation from the years that I'd spent putting into socials. And yeah, to get it in quite a short space of time was obviously really like incredible, and I'm really grateful to have had that moment and to be in the position I am now. But it's definitely come with a lot of its own anxieties and stresses, and it definitely is not, I'm not suddenly just like feeling much I'm if anything, I'm like doubt stuff more a lot of the time, and it kind of like it puts me in like a more like anxious headspace, because I feel like there's something that I need to kind of like uphold, and I don't want to be like regressing. It needs to be constantly like moving forwards. So yeah, those are all internal issues rather than external ones. But it's yeah, it's a minefield out there. It's very hard.
Yeah, yeah, I completely relate to that, James. And um, yeah, there are a lot of aspects involved. Um, and yeah, you got me thinking um, about this. That I think is not, of course, um, yeah, it is not just about being online, which is nowadays is very important, is essential,
Mm.
because we go where the attention is, and there's no shame. You deserve attention. Attention is a good thing, because you're talking about your music. Your music is
Mm.
one of the most beautiful things you can share to others. It's a special thing. It's your light. Is your vision, as you said. Um, so it's about being present. So like, and also there's another layer, is sharing about you, what you were doing. So your journey, um, based on your experience, James, because you've been doing that. You were doing that. How do you find that? I don't know why I don't like that word balance. I love saying harmony between what you are sharing online, which is also your personal reflections, conversations, because I also see you sharing about you reflecting on your own life and why staying true to who you are, because it's online, it's not in a physical, um, like context.
Mm.
And what kind of advice would you feel giving to another the person, independent artist or musician, listening to today's episode?
Yeah, man, 100%. So, yeah, I think the most important thing is to not be afraid to just like try stuff out. Basically, you are going to have a much better idea of what feels right and what feels representative of who you are by just putting yourself out there. And I think trying to get rid of that feeling of like embarrassment of what people are going to think, because like no one's going to really think about it that much,
Yeah.
that this is one thing that people say is like, if you're worried about like something you post not doing well, if it doesn't do well, like no one's going to see it, so it won't matter. I know how much that can like hurt when you, it feels like a personal, if people not liking something that you put up that seems very representative of you, it internally feels like the world is saying, yeah, we don't care about this. We don't care about this at all. But it is just, that's not what it means. And you need to, yeah, be able to survive that like the struggles of like dealing with yeah, self-worth and comparison. There's no there's no like blueprint to that. It's just trying things and trying to separate your like happiness from how well the like the things that you're putting out into the world are being received. And if you feel comfortable sharing other aspects of your life outside of your music, there's probably going to be more for people to latch onto. Like one of the most inherent things when it comes to humans is storytelling, and people always going to latch onto a story. It doesn't matter like who you are and like how boring you think your life has been. There's always somebody that's going to relate to that, and I think that is actually one of the big positives of how connected the world is. It doesn't matter how niche the thing you do is, you're going to be able to find an audience of people that resonate with it. It might not be a huge audience. You might not be set to be like the next Beyonce or something, but like there's like you can find a group of people that resonate with the thing that you do. That's
Yeah.
possible, however niche it is, and that's not something that would have been very easy 20 years ago. So I think that is that one big positive from how connected the world is. And the way that algorithms work, they're set up in order to try and keep people on the app. So if there's a thing that you do that's very specific, like Instagram and TikTok, they're going to want to show it to people that are interested in that. So that's why I think it's important to just like double down on the things that make you unique. And like I said, like maybe you don't know what those things are. You just have to like put yourself out there and just not overthink it. I think that like it's really easy to spend a bit of time scrolling, trying to get inspiration and be like, oh, that worked for that person, that worked for that person, and then just like try and copy what's worked for other people. And not to say that there's not stuff you can extrapolate from what's worked, but if you spend your time just like trying to chase other people's like successes like that, you're probably it's probably going to be hard to figure out where you are within that.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's just a case of experimenting a bunch and just trying to make stuff that it like and represent yourself in a way that is like fun. And as somebody that definitely has like quite an introverted side to them, I get that that's not always an easy thing. And if you need to kind of like step back from it sometimes, that's like totally fine to do. um but yeah, it's a really difficult one. But like, you know, everybody is in the same boat, and the thing is that it can change incredibly quickly. Like, there was this like 2 year period, over 2 year period, where I was posting incredibly consistently, and I tried so many different things. If anybody can be bothered to scroll back like 2 years on my feed, you'll see I did like a very large number of different types of videos, and I try some for a bit, and I'll be like, this doesn't feel right anymore, and I kind of move on, and I just kept trying to evolve to what
Yeah.
felt right at the time. And I did like, there's probably like 300 videos I did without any outliers at all. Like, you know, all of the engagement from them was like pretty much the same. And I like, some days it would kind of bother me, and some days I'd be like, honestly, it doesn't, like, I'm just here, I'm just showing up, and I'm just doing it. And then, you know, in the space of like 6 weeks, I kind of like 10x'd my followers, and engagement like went up so much. So it happened like incredibly quickly. It's like that whole obviously there's like levels to this, and obviously like there's much more that I would like to become and grow to, but like the overnight success thing of like, you know, it took like 10 years to become an overnight success. That, like, that as a concept, I think what happened to me on socials is like a microcosm of that, in the sense that like I put in a lot of time over a very large length a number of years, and then I very quickly got yeah, like had this moment. One side note to that quickly that I really like always feel like I need to mention
Yeah.
is that um a follower and a fan are a very different thing, and I think that as the years pass, that becomes even more stark. So I am not in a position now where I have 30,000 people that are like coming to shows that I'm doing and buying my music. It's very much not that. So uh I think let me just dive into this quickly. There's a mental model that I really like, that I've talked about on my podcast quite a bit, called the map is not the territory. So basically, what it means is that, you know, you have a map of a city. The map is a basic representation of what the city is, and its purpose is in order for you to find your way through that place. So just using that concept in terms of followers, your follower count is a signal for success. So like, the more followers you have, you assume that that person has more eyeballs on them and more people that care about them.
Mm.
But similarly to a map of a city not being the city itself, your follower count is not a true representation of how many people are your fans. And I think people get very hung up on the wrong things that are signals of what you want, but not the thing itself. So how many monthly listeners you have on Spotify, how many followers you have on socials, like what your engagement is. All of these things are signals of you being a successful artist with a fan base, but none of them are, you know, I know people that have like 1 million monthly listeners and like 1 million Instagram followers, but then they can't sell out like 100 cap venue in their hometown or something. And it's like, there's a disconnect going on here. It's not carrying through to these other places, and that's okay. Like, but I think it's important to not like lose yourself in thinking that that, that you're focusing on the wrong metric, and thinking that you're like further ahead than you are, maybe, and just kind of like just capping your ego a bit and being like, you know, there's still, I'm like grateful for where I'm at, but there's still work to be done, and like there's
Of course.
still some like cultivating that needs to happen. Yeah, I think that's one downside to quick growth, because compared to somebody that spent 10 years building this solid foundation of a fan base, that's going to withstand so much more than something that's happened to me, where it's like really really quick, looks great, and like obviously I'm definitely in a better position than I was, but like I haven't built this really solid relationship with a lot of these fans and followers, because they're so new. And that's really what my focus is this year, uh rather than being like growth mindset forever. It's like, okay, how do I take people that are new to, and then kind of convert them into people that like care more about like other aspects of me, and are more inclined to buy my music and come to shows and all of that side of things. But yeah, I think that's something that shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah. Um, I mean, the growth was quick, let's say. But the journey was long, James, because you kept showing up, you kept posting. Personally, one of the things that captured my attention every time I head over to a profile on Instagram is not the number of followers, is not the number of people that person is following, but is the number of posts. I don't know why, because the first thing I'm saying to myself is this person is here committed to showing himself for
Mm.
some reason. And for example, in my case, when I started following you, I saw some sort of commitment behind you telling people I'm doing this because I have a reason, because it's my music and I care about that. It's important to me. And I believe that people can feel that. Your story is just as important as your music, and people connect because of who you are and how you make them feel. So
Mm.
there's more behind that. And again, the journey has been a long journey for you, James, because you never stopped.
100%.
And then of course there's a growth, but yeah, growth in terms of numbers, because in the context of Instagram. But on the other side, what people want the most is knowing what's on the other side. And the beauty of seeing you is that you are doing it by sharing little pieces of you. For example, you mentioned storytelling, but I believe that storytelling doesn't have to be you sharing your own story. So I read a post of you, and I think on Facebook, and you shared a little reflection on your latest single, which is I don't remember the name of the single. Is of
Fla-
your
f-
upcoming album, Flying.
yeah. So that's actually that's the last thing before that's actually not on the album, but like the last thing before I kind of get into the album. But yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, continue.
but it's a single, James, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I liked what you said. I mean, it was you sharing the meaning behind the single, which is strictly connected to high expectations and not
Mm.
you know uh, feeling fully satisfied of what we've done and we're doing.
Mm.
That's storytelling. You're telling me a piece of you, a piece of your story, actual story. I mean, not a story in the past, but that's storytelling.
So true, man. Yeah.
And that connects in some way.
Mm,
And I
mm.
believe that is what people want. And you doing that, and the fact that you kept doing that is powerful.
Yeah, man. I totally agree. Yeah.
James, great conversation. I
Yeah.
There's another um, thing that I wanted to ask you before, as we land this beautiful plane. Um, I wanted to ask you this because I recently hosted a free webinar on how to craft a stress-free content release strategy. So my purpose was to help independent artists how to develop, how to facilitate their content release planning. And one of the things I emphasized during the webinar was the importance of making things simple for those who don't have a lot of time.
Mm,
Because most of the times I see musicians saying and shouting to me, and I think, I mean, the same for you. I don't have a lot of time to do that, so how can I manage, everything while staying focused on my craft, on the things I want to create, my music activities. So, um, my question is, if any independent artist had just a couple of hours during the week, um, where should they focus their energy, in your opinion, when it
yeah,
comes to
man.
their presence online?
So, couple thoughts. Firstly, I would say that anything can work in terms of connecting with people through some form of video content, as long as you have framed it in a way that is connecting with people. That's a very, very broad answer in terms of like, there's so many ways that could look. I guess my point would be, let's say you were like, you there was a music video or like mini music video idea you had, and you tried it out and it ended up looking kind of shit. If you've documented that process as well, that's the thing that people can connect with. You can be like, this is, I had these high expectations of this thing, I tried it, didn't work out, look how bad it looks. Like, that's a connectable thing. It's just like humanizing you in a way that people can relate to. um
Beautiful.
so yeah, I guess my point is that it doesn't have to go well. Like, whatever level you're at, that is fine. Like, you can do the whole like doing a music video on zero budget, like, and it's not about how pristine it looks. It's about how real it is, and just like, that you're representing yourself in a way that people can connect with. So the other thing I would say is, yeah, what saying people that maybe only have like a couple hours a week, I would probably just like push back on that a bit and be like, okay, so you've put in X amount of time on these songs. Maybe like you've invested a decent amount of money getting them up until this point. Don't undermine the promotion part of the process, as it is just as important these days as how good the music is. So maybe I would say that, like, depending on what your schedule is, I don't know if you're working full time or like doing a bunch of other music stuff, I would say that like find more time than a couple hours a week. It like that might, maybe some people genuinely only have a couple hours. I guess my point is that this is really, really important, and I would say that this is probably a really big bottleneck for most artists. Just like finding a way to promote their music in a way that is connecting with people. And if you've spent so much time and energy and money getting it to that point, and then you're kind of only putting in a couple hours a week to get that done, then you're maybe not giving it its best shot, and maybe you do actually need to prioritize that more. That's not to say that you have to spend ages on a video. I'm just saying, if you want to have like a concise release plan that's like, you're hitting a lot of points, and there's longevity with it. You're not just like putting a couple videos up and then you're like, shit, I'm out of ideas, I'm done. Like, if you want to connect with people and like have multiple opportunities to reach them through the content plan, then, man, like, yeah, try and prioritize that as much as possible. Like, I think that is that shouldn't be overlooked. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you're wasting hours and hours on trying to make a video perfect. Like, yeah, I went back to just using my iPhone for all of my content like 6 months ago, because I went through a period of trying to make my videos look all pretty and nice using a digital camera, and like, it took way longer and the performance actually did worse. That's not to say that high quality videos don't do well, but just like, it's finding what works for you. And if you're wasting loads of time perfecting something that isn't connecting with people, maybe just like try doing something, try doing something on your phone and see if it performs like worse or better or the same. So I found that when I went back to using my phone, it didn't perform better for a while, but I was taking a quarter of the time to do it. So I was still gaining time back, even if I wasn't getting a better reaction. And yeah, in terms of like how you are promoting it, there's literally so many different ways. It's very overwhelming. I'm going through this right now, trying to plan out my content plan. I've gone through periods of time where I really plan content ahead. I would say don't use this as like like gospel in terms of like what works, but like, through all of the growth that I had, I didn't plan a single bit of that. I just was documenting as much as I could, and then I just like figure it out per day. I've also spent periods of time where I have planned it a lot. Sometimes it can take the stress away. Sometimes it can like feel like it adds stress. Experiment and just find what makes you feel most like amped up to kind of like make stuff. And yeah, maybe blocking a bit of time out regularly throughout the week is a good way of doing it. Or, people sometimes you block out a whole day and then just like you can get quite deep into it and just like try and be really creative. I think the important thing is just to not like underestimate how important it could be for the performance of your music. And as much as so many artists resent the fact that that's something they have to do. Again, going back to the thing I said earlier, like, don't make your life like actively harder just to kind of like make a stand, unless it is like so fucking important to you that like that is like a representative, that's like a part of who you are as an artist, in which case like follow through with that, but just be aware of the fact that it's going to be a bit harder. Yeah, I think
Yeah, yeah,
that's what it comes down to.
yeah. Very good point, James. I think, yeah, which is, yeah, I'm trying to sum up the biggest takeaway, which
Mm,
is, yeah, taking advantage of your daily life moment. So bridging the gap between the time, between how you spend time in real life, so who you are in real life, and
mm,
what you put out there, because you've been posting a lot of snippets of you working with other artists and musicians.
mm, mm.
It doesn't take a lot of time to do that. Just, you put a smartphone in front of you and press record.
Yeah, literally.
That's why, yeah, that's why, James, I think, tell me your experience. It's also about, you're also talking about perfectionism.
Totally.
Don't you? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, when it comes to your music, maybe there's more leeway there to kind of like be a perfectionist. Obviously, there's also a kind of point where you've gone too far on that. But when it's content, it's so disposable. It really doesn't have to be perfect. And yeah, you can, again, I don't mean like rush it and put out just like bad videos, but just like don't, yeah, like it don't, it's not a valuable use of your time to spend a day making one video if you're trying to keep up like a consistent release schedule in terms of content, because it's just gonna stress you out. And then if you put a day's work into something and it flops, and you do that again and again and again, it's going to start like really grating on you. Where if you spent 5 minutes on a video and it doesn't do well, you're like, well, it's 5 minutes, man, like I can do another
Yeah,
5 minutes to do that, like
yeah, it is. It is. It is. But it
so
takes a lot of courage, James,
yeah,
because it's
yeah,
like, okay, press record, and then you press record again, and then you post it, of course,
yeah. Mm,
in a
mm.
strategic way, so adding captions and keywords and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. 100%, man. It's
James, thank you so much.
thank you, man.
Last point: um, if you had, if you would suggest any independent artist how to stay true to themselves on online, what would you say?
It's a really good point. So I would say as early as possible, don't get lost in a world of comparison, because comparison is the thing that makes you doubt yourself the most, and it's going to be the thing that takes away your joy the most. It's going to undermine your wins, and it's going to make you feel inferior to other people. If you can, from an early position when you're coming online and like starting a project, if you can find a way to safeguard your feelings of self-worth, and notice when you have feelings of comparison, and are able to kind of dispel them and not follow that thread down a bad deep rabbit hole, then you're gonna be able to trust your intuition more, and like not question your decisions so much. And I think those things are going to lead you to finding like your unique kind of like honest, authentic self online the quickest, at least.